Coming up, in the absence of one Kevin Durant, we take a look at Ben Simmons, his performance to this point of the season, and why, if he is the key figure that needs to step up for Brooklyn, there could be potential offensive issues on the way.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrick, breaking down the playoff New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, we're just a couple days in to figuring out how the Brooklyn Nets survive without Kevin Durant. And it brought up a pretty interesting idea of, and you mentioned this last episode, Ben Simmons probably needs to be forced into a more significant offensive role. And you have some concerning stats that may make this an issue for the Nets going forward.
Yeah, look, they're going to need Simmons to step up in a pretty big way here, probably. I think this is actually a good, and I'll start with the positive first. I actually think this is a good time of the season. If you were ever going to deal with injuries, and which you almost always are with the NBA, and if you're going to deal with injuries around your superstars, having it happen, for one, not having it be season ending, and two, happening now in the timeline, right? Which with the 4 to 6 week timeline to return, something like that. It gives you time to actually probably sort out some other things that your team could stand to sort out in that time. So I think if we're trying to go glass half full here, I do want to say that I think there's a lot of ways that this can end up being, sort of a positive for the Nets.
Positive, right?
A net positive
is the way to frame it. But when we look back on
pun
it,
intended,
we'll think that was good.
Yeah, and good pun there too. So, but it really gets you thinking about Simmons and like sort of what Simmons has been for this team so far. And there are some pretty concerning things that this absence for Durant could help to work out. So Eric Slater posted this, and I think he was reposting something from Kurt Goldsberry, but then I just went and looked up the stats just to make sure we had them exact here. And a really concerning number is something that you can actually just see with your own. This passes the eye test when you watch Simmons this year and how his game has transformed since coming to the Nets after his run with the Sixers. And it has to do with passivity around the ball and sort of how little he's doing certain things, specifically trying to get to the basket. If we already know that Simmons can't really shoot, he's not going to start taking three-pointers. We already know this to be the case. Those three-pointers are not walking in the door anytime soon. But he's still super athletic. He has a ton of size relative to most defenders that are going to be on him, or the ones that are bigger are going to be slower than him. And that has, in the past, necessitated him trying to get to the basket, getting ahead of steam, and getting to the rim. And that was something earlier in his career. And for most of his career, he did a lot / kind of well. If you even go back to 2020-21, his last full season with the Sixers, per NBA stats, his drives per game were 10.2 drives per game in 32 minutes, 10.2. And he got around 3.5 field goal attempts at the rim during that time. So you're like, okay, that's great. His numbers this year with the drives, you have a guess? You have a guess what it is? 10.2 was not even the highest as a Sixer, but that was just this last year. I know this is like kind of throwing this at you.
No, 1.5.
It's more. It's 3.2.
That's 3.2. You know what? I'm blown away. I'm filled with confidence now because I'm shocked. Yeah,
a 66% drop in drives per game for a guy who can't shoot. So it's like one thing if you don't have that many drives per game because you're pulling up in the mid range. And even, by the way, the best guys like that still try to get to the rim because it makes sense to get to the rim, to get fouled, to do all this other stuff. He can't shoot and he's not driving at all. So 3.2 drives per game, again, confirms what we've seen with our eyes, which is to say because when he does actually take someone to the rim, we're like, oh, nice, let's see more of that. And then it happens once per game, and that's kind of it. I mean, what do you hear? Like, what do you think when you see that number? We'll get into a few more of these numbers, but when you see that number specifically, like, does it confirm worse fears? Is it like, okay, there's room for growth? I don't know. This is like, it's a pretty concerning.
Yeah, and I was a little curious in the background here. I don't know if this is a stat that can be pulled up about passes out like off of drives versus actually,
Okay,
going
so
over the rim.
go to, if you have another point, say it. But then I have some of
Okay,
that stuff. Yeah.
perfect. No, my initial reaction is like it's concerning more than it is, hey, room for growth. The reason being is you're already in a position when you're playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, when the team is at full strength, it's actually the optimal time for Ben Simmons to be able to attack at the basket because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are giving you all the space. They're opening up the lane. Now you can look and say with Claxton on the floor, where is he positionally? And we saw that early in the year where sometimes you end up with the two of them congested inside of the paint. But early in games, to your point, we've seen those sequences where it'd be within the first 3 possessions. Ben Simmons would get ahead of steam and drive at the basket. And that's always, I think, why it was misleading. Go, here we go. Wait until we see this 6 or 7 times this game. And then you'd get it maybe 2 more times. And often, and this is what I was curious about, is like often it wasn't even him finishing going at the rim. It was just the drive and then something off of that, which can still be productive, but it further emphasizes his lack of aggressiveness.
Yeah, so his his assist percentage is actually not dropped off anywhere close to the dramatic drop off that we've seen in the drives, right? So the assist, which also so good thing, right? He's still a distributor. He's still sort of a connect. He's definitely a connector in the offense. Like that has been his primary, if only, role in the offense really so far with the Brooklyn Nets. So the assist percentage is like down from like it's still down. It's like 9% to like 7% or something like that, or not something like that. Those are the numbers. 9% to 7%. Yeah. So those don't drop off dramatically because he still has the ball in his hands. It's just that when he has the ball, it's a full on default to passing every single time. Like even the drives that he does initiate oftentimes end with him passing too, either a kick out, a dump off to Claxton and the dunker. Like those are the things we've seen every once in a while, an attempt to finish at the rim. The usage rate is in the toilet. It's like 14.5%. That's one of the lowest on the team. Like for guys that it was really the lowest of the team. Actually, the only guy really that gets minutes that's lower than him is Yuta, but that's fine because Yuta's just basically taking wide open threes and making them. So like you can live with the low usage rate because the shots he's taking are like the most valuable in the game. These wide open corner threes that he knocks down at an elite rate. The Simmons numbers are really concerning. And at the same time, you can tell yourself a story about why it's happening too, right? It's like, well, why, at least for him too, it's like, well, why would I take an overwhelming amount of shots when I have two of the greatest sort of 3-level scorers that have ever played the game on my team here and a bunch of other guys that do it really well too. But I think here now, with that off the table, I will become really concerned if it doesn't happen now. Up until this point, I think we could, again, everyone could tell themselves a story about why this is not maybe the optimal way for him to play in this current iteration of the offense. Without Durant, though, if these numbers specifically do not by just default creep up, like I think we actually have a pretty big concern in our hands because, and for like going forward for this iteration of the team.
Yeah, which raises larger problems in terms of what his value is, and we know the contract and everything else. Coming up in a second, I do want to ask you a question with where Ben Simmons came from in his career and who he played with versus who he's played with now, and also maybe comparing how his production and that offensive statistics we're discussing reflect relative to Nicholas Claxton.
All right, before we do that, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. We've been telling you about PrizePicks for a while now. Frankly, it's just easy. Like this daily fantasy made super easy. For a while, yeah, daily fantasy, you're trying to wrangle salaries, you're trying to wrangle these different players and positions into lineups, and then you're going against sharks in the water for these other sites. PrizePicks just took that kind of concept and made it very, very simple. No more sharks in the water, no more salaries. You're just going against their player projections. You're going more or less. And that is it. And it's not just points either. Points, assists, rebounds, steals, blocks, just for the NBA. We get into all the other sports as well. PrizePicks figured it out. They just want you to make pick 2 to 6 players, figure out if they're going to go more or less than their PrizePicks projections, and you can win 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against those other folks. It's just you versus the projections. Like I said, they got NBA, NFL heading into the playoffs, MLB right around the corner, hockey every single night, and the list goes on and on and on. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, safe and fast withdrawals, which is really saying something in the industry these days. They're currently operational in 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit 100, PrizePicks will give you 100. If you deposit 50, PrizePicks will give you 50, and you can figure out all the other different versions of that. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy.
Okay, so before we turn our attention over to looking at now what the lineups could be, obviously, for the Brooklyn Nets without Kevin Durant, and maybe booing our spirits, reflecting on what that lineup looked like last year when Kevin Durant went out. Before we do, though, so it's two things. One, and this is going maybe optimistic, Ben Simmons didn't play in Philadelphia with players like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving with those skill sets. So if you want to go on the positive side, it's that not only is he coming back from an injury, trying to build himself back up, trying to build up his confidence, he's also trying to figure out the best way to play with different offensive talents. Because you could make the case that driving the lane for Philadelphia, and whether it's distributing, dropping off to Embiid or kicking outside, but attacking at the basket, that was what was required of him. And I think, I know for a fact that Joel Embiid missed a lot of games when Ben Simmons was there as well. So there is that push and pull in terms of what his role looked like in Philadelphia versus here. I think that you can say that and go, that's why it's okay that he's not driving at the basket. Now, in the absence of Kevin Durant, it could be a problem, but do you think it's like, because the assists are still there, the distribution is still there, can that be as much a part of this as in he was trying to evolve his game and then maybe he will just revert back to what he did a lot of in past seasons with Philly?
I think that's probably being really glass half full. I think that
tells you that he doesn't want to do that,
and that's what it is, right? Too, like, look, I default to the numbers as much as humanly possible because I just think that they tell a far greater story than your eyes. Your eyes will tend to fool you at things, right? You'll come in with a preconception, you'll come in with something you already think, and you'll let some confirmation bias happen with your eyes that will tell you the story that you already told yourself. Now, I do think the NBA, like a lot of other sports, warrants, some expert level just insight onto it also, or just, and I think following it with your eyes too. With this situation, I think that the numbers back up the scary situation. Let me put it this way: the scary situation is when the numbers back up the thing your eyes are also telling you, right? Like, so, like that's the part where I think you can feel pretty comfortable with both things, because it's like, hey, it looks like there's a lot of passivity here. It looks like he's not feeling confident. I don't think it's just like, hey, this is the personnel that he's playing with and he's defaulting to it. I think my guess is it's something more, and the numbers. So, like, my eyes are already telling me one thing, and then the numbers are even worse than I expected, right? So that's the scary part. It's when the numbers are even worse to some degree than what your eyes have told you. That is where we get into a really scary situation, because, you mentioned the time with Philly. If you look back, so you look back at time, the personnel was different. Embiid, him and Embiid match wasn't great. Like, but he played with shooters, and like we saw maybe good, at least statistical versions of himself when that was the case. This was a guy who, despite all of his shooting problems, the final year in Philly was like top 15 in the league in qualified field goal percentage. So like when he got to the rim, it was working. He was finishing at the same level as other efficient big men, because like if you look at most times field goal percentage is at the top of the list is made up of guys who are just centers, right? It's like that year was Rudy Gobert, Rashawn Holmes, Robin Lopez, Ayton, Harrell, Jared Allen. Like the list is all centers basically until you get to basically Simmons, right? And then there's like a few hybrids like Giannis and Zion and guys like this, and then Simmons. So this list was among field goal percentage guys at the end of that year was all centers, and then like elite hybrid dudes and Simmons. Yeah. That's the group. And so you're like, okay, well, he did actually do this pretty well. The fact that he did it pretty well and he stopped doing it completely, like that's the concern, right?
And so my other thing is too, and again, since I feel like those stats are at your fingertips here, I was curious about Nicholas Claxton's drives per game this year versus last year for him. That's the evolution of his game, but just thinking about the way maybe the team is also evolving around Ben Simmons, a new player coming in. But the other thing I wonder about is, and I'm gonna make a ask
Well, his
another
drives are
question.
going to be low. His drives are going to be low because he's getting the ball in the paint already. Like he's not
Right. So they're
driving
not
the
going to
ball.
count them as
It's the
Those are
tracking. Yeah, just to clarify here,
lead-in
drives are not
passes.
finishing at the basket. It's like it's starting outside the restricted area and beyond, and
Right.
then finishing at the rim. Like is what's going to constitute a drive. A drive is not going to just be getting the ball near the basket.
Right. So because the one thing that I wonder about too from Philly now to Brooklyn is when you have that field goal percentage and you're talking about Ben Simmons finishing in and around the rim, I wonder also, and this is like going back and watching tape of, well, how many times? Because this season, what have we seen? When in the 3.5 times per game that he's doing it, a lot of times it ends up being with him with an offhand or with an angled, push shot with trying to get a bank to go in, as opposed to if the spacing is there, if the matchup was right, where Ben Simmons is going up and over the top. And that can actually be also a byproduct of when you have a guy like Joel Embiid playing with you. Well, guess what? The biggest body you can afford is going to go on him. And then Ben can end up getting a lot of plus matchups, even just from a size standpoint. So it's like, yeah, around the rim, he finishes very effectively around the rim. But I'd love to know how often is that on a flush, which we talk about with Claxton, dunks, really high percentage opportunities, versus, hey, if you're getting challenged by more primary bigs for the opposition, which would be more likely now with Brooklyn than it was with Philadelphia, that can also be on top of not having the confidence, and the eye test tells you that, then being discouraged by the fact that I'm also trying to get over top of a Vucevic or get over top of an Embiid, a Gobert, those type of players in these matchups potentially. And then none of these things are excuses. I think it's just the reality of who he is, not what he was, and now the team he plays with, right? Like all of those things may have conspired here to make this a very difficult lift, even if he was coming back 100%.
And I think too, and just to add to that, I agree with all that. And I think he has this other piece in here also, which is really unfortunate when it comes to driving the basket, is that, and there's no data to suggest this, but well, okay, there is some data to suggest this. We don't know this to be the case because this is going to be more of a mental thing, is that it doesn't seem like he wants to get fouled at all either, right? Because I think because, and if that's the case, if you are not wanting to go into contact because you don't love the way it looks when you get to the free throw line or don't like the feel of it or whatever, because the numbers there are garbage, then you are going to finish at the rim differently too, rather than going like full head of steam. Hey, if I get bodied, it's great. I'll end up with 2 free ones at the stripe. Like that's not the case either. Right. So it's, and when you add that into the mix, it becomes really big a problem because the other number that's obviously dropped off for him in a big way is the free throw attempts per game. He's averaged, and now some of this is it's by the way, it's per minute, a huge drop off too. He was averaging around 5 free throws a game in 32-ish minutes when he was with the Sixers in that final year. This year, at getting close to 28 minutes, it's 1.5. So there's been, yes, there's been a reduction in obviously in the minutes, but like the reduction in the overall reduction in free throws is way beyond what it is just per minute. So he's just not he's not wanting to go to the line at all. And if that's going to be the case, the finishing will look different too, because you're not going to want to go into someone's bodies. You're going to stop short and go for the little jump hook. You're not going to want to finish at the rim because you don't want to get fouled. And this stuff just has to solve itself. Like, I think that for the Nets to really be a great team right now, they are a really, really good team. For the Nets to be a great team with Durant, this stuff, one part of this has to solve itself. Like, I don't, right? Like,
not all of it.
We mentioned 3 different problems here with him specifically around this issue. Some parts of this have to solve themselves because it's just too easy to game plan against. Like when you really get down to it.
Yeah. And coming up here in a second, we're going to reflect on what the lineup was last year when Kevin Durant was absent, why the lineup this year is so much better. And I will pose a question to Doug Norrie regarding how the Brooklyn Nets can maybe mitigate some of these concerns with Ben Simmons.
All right, first going to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net. Betonline.net has you covered for all of your betting needs. They're carrying you through the NBA season. If you go there, you got to go there not when the games are playing because they kind of take this down. But if you go, you can get some of the future stuff that's going on with the Brooklyn Nets. One good news for betonline.net, our friends over there, is that even with a Durant injury right now, the Nets are still 3rd overall in championship odds, plus 750 behind the Celtics. Bucks creeped up just a little bit about them. That's okay. Nets really still aren't falling all that much with the Durant piece. That is what we like to see from our friends over at BetOnline to get the latest odds, all the latest trends, every professional and amateur league out there. Maybe you're into the college football. the other night, Georgia covers the total on their own. Nice job by them. Didn't even need TCU to show up to make sure you got in on the over when it came to the college championship game. All that and more over at BetOnline. Head on over to BetOnline right now. Use that mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Okay, so where we're going to start to close out the episode here is obviously knowing that there's going to be some amount of time. You and I have kind of put it around that 18 to 22 games because that's the way injuries work. Reevaluation in 2 weeks for Kevin Durant and then going from there. But we thought this could be also a nice way to make the fan base feel better and more confident. And quite frankly, the fan base has not been all doom and gloom around this injury. So I think that they understand where this is going. But we've talked about the TJ Warren stepping up and some of the other players on this year's roster. Doug, who was going out there for the starting five for the Brooklyn Nets last year when KD missed a handful of games?
Oh man, so I looked this up the other day just to get a sense. I was trying to, because after the podcast we talked about just how the Nets were just better formulated to be in a better situation, more depth, more talent, just more versatile kind of players. So I was like, yeah, let's go look at what the starting lineup was after the Durant injury last game. All right, here we go. It's going to start off okay, and then we're going to tell a story with this, right? So the first is Harden and Kyrie. Those you're like, okay, not too bad. Here's the rest of the starting lineup. Patty Mills, Kessler Edwards, Day'Ron Sharpe. That was the starting five. By the way, not a one-off. They started that lineup the next game too. I don't want to shock you here with this line. And then it wasn't like the options off the bench where it was Bruce Brown. Okay, we love Bruce, but that was before he'd really kind of taken over the new role. Aldridge was getting 32 minutes in that first game. Oh, no, sorry, that's the second game. And then Cam Thomas played a lot of minutes. They went on to lose the next 18 of their 25 games. When you look at this lineup, you're like, how'd they even win 7? Because they traded Harden. Oh no, sorry, 18 in the next 23. How'd they win 5? This lineup, I don't front run Twitter too much because just whatever. I have to ignore at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter. I tweeted this lineup out. I've never had more quote tweets with a comment on any tweet I've ever sent than this one here, which was about the lineup, because people were just apoplectic about this was the lineup that the Nets had thrown out there. James Harden, who was basically done with the Nets at this point because it was only a few games till the Kings game that he just completely tanked it. It was Harden, just to reiterate, Harden, Irving, Patty Mills at the 3. Okay, good job. Kessler Edwards at the 4. Day'Ron Sharpe at the 5. 3 of those 5 guys, well, one's not on the team, and the other 3 can't even play minutes. They're on the team and they don't play right now in the current Nets.
Patty Mills at the 3. Patty Mills,
I guess maybe he's defending the 2 because Harden's defending the 3. I don't know. Like, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Who cares? What a mess. And by the way, so the funny thing about this too was, because I want to ask you a question about this year's lineup now in the absence of Kevin Durant, which guess what? Spoiler, it's way better. But over that stretch of games, so it's like January 15th. Durant comes back at the beginning of February. And here, first of all, first irony, the Nets won 2 out of their first 3 games without Kevin Durant. He left after the New Orleans Pelicans win on the 15th. They turned around and lost to Cleveland, then beat Washington and San Antonio before that chef's kiss of an 11-game losing streak. But inside of that, you had Irving, as you would expect, one game of Harden being your top scorer before they traded him. But then it was Cam Thomas gets in there 2 times over that stretch, 3 times almost. You get Curry coming in as Durant is coming back around. You even get, not in the starting lineup, but you did get Nicholas Claxton with a 23-point performance. And while you'd say, oh my God, Nicholas Claxton for 23, never want that to be your top scorer. Usually an awful sign inside of those games. So, dude, it's so funny going back to that stretch there. And there was also the stretch when Kevin Durant, with all the young players, you had that really fun run. The key thing there was it was the young players with Kevin Durant, not without him. So, Kessler Edwards, we now have come back down to earth in such a big way from one season to the next. And just think about that. Right? I mean, Day'Ron Sharpe was getting some run there. You have obviously Kessler Edwards, even Cam Thomas. Fast forward a year later, to your point, it's not just Patty Mills, a veteran player, is not getting minutes. Cam Thomas doesn't see the court. Kessler Edwards in the G League. Day'Ron Sharpe in the G League occasionally comes up for some garbage minutes. Like, what an insane contrast of roster construction. Even more crazy because you still have Sean Marks as the GM. He's the same guy put together that roster and navigated it last year as this year. and you'd say there's no world this could have been the same mind that put these two rosters together.
Yeah, it really is. It really was just so it's so easy to forget these things, right? Like the sports world moves fast, things change really rapidly. We feel different now than we felt a week ago and 2 weeks ago, and so on and so forth, right? So like the sports world changed fast, but it is a nice reminder to look back at this team, and be like, oh, I don't think we felt positive at the time. But I don't remember probably thinking it was like the end of the world, right? We're like, yeah, Daron's giving us some good minutes and Kessler Edwards might be a guy.
And remember,
but by
too,
contrast, it's so stark.
Well, remember, too, Kevin Durant goes down. You think, well, James Harden, Kyrie Irving.
Right.
And they trade James Harden. You go, oh, no, wait a second here. Now we're just taking away
Well, there's a Javon Carter sighting. Javon Carter sighting for most points in here.
I missed it. He was a leading scorer in one of those games over that stretch. Like,
yeah, I mean, they got completely crushed that game. So like I think it probably was mostly garbage time. Yeah. But it just goes to show you that this is they lost by 30 to the Celtics. It just goes to show you that this was, by the way, starting lineup for that game. Oh, baby. This must have been like a COVID thing or Kyrie got hurt or something. Starting lineup for the Celtics game. I can't even read this. Patty Mills, DeAndre Bembry, Bruce Brown, Kessler Edwards, Blake Griffin. I think even at the time we're like, are they going to score 10 points? Like who scores any points in that lineup? It's just, this is insane. So anyway, I think Kyrie got COVID during that time. So it is a nice proof positive, I think, to end on a positive note here, that the Nets, and we need not end, but just to round it into a positive note, that the Nets are just in such a different place. Like you said, like the same guy, Sean Marks, put together both of these teams, which feels like so night and day that it's unbelievable. And there's other context. Like I said, COVID was still, the health and safety protocols were still a thing at this time. This is not just only, roster construction, but even if let me put it this way, even if Simmons doesn't make the corrections that we talked about at the first 20 minutes of the podcast, they're still in a better place. They're still in such a better place. We can talk about what do you think the starting lineup is going to be, but they're in such a better place here.
Well, so okay, and that's what I wanted to kind of end on here, and this will probably extend into our next episode, and then we know Thursday night. By the way, it's like the first time we'll get to see what it's going to look like. It's been so far away since Kevin Durant got injured with these days off. But that was my other thing, was thinking about, okay, there's the version where we list these 3 problems, the 3 areas of issue for Ben Simmons' game. You say, just fix one of them. And I think the easiest one almost would be like, just go aggressive at the basket. Even if you're not making the foul shots, just start there, because it can benefit other players in big ways when we talk about picking up fouls. But the other thing I thought about, if we're thinking of that starting lineup, is maybe there's a world where in the absence of Kevin Durant, we don't, and this is the dangerous one of, well, Ben Simmons, what have you been doing well? You've been a great facilitator this season and setting the table. So maybe we don't say, ramp it up, Ben. You got to start getting downhill, attacking at the basket, drive the lane more. Maybe we say, Nicholas Claxton, you have been phenomenal this year. I'll pose this question. Maybe it's more about, can Nicholas Claxton continue to step up his game? Because he has been on such a force this season. And you talked about the other day, how much do you want to put on him on the offensive end, and then that defensive value that he has, obviously. But I do come back to this. Maybe it is Ben Simmons and, Kyrie Irving effectively in the backcourt with Claxton at the 5, and you put shooters out there with him, Warren, whoever, Harris, etc., Royce O'Neal. And you just say, man, if that's what your best attribute is right now, lean into it hard as all hell, and let's try to bury teams, because you are a next level court vision passer. Let's accentuate what you do well, not demand you fix something that you've clearly been working on, but hasn't come to fruition yet, even with the superstars.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I don't think that these things aren't mutually exclusive. Like, these other guys can play better and he can also do this thing. I mean, there's enough time and, on ball stuff in a basketball game for it all to happen, right? I don't think, and some of it happens because Simmons gets better. Like, it makes, theoretically, him driving to the basket makes it easier for these other guys to do other things. Like, so I don't think only one of them can happen and we need to pick one. I do think that I think everyone's going to need to step their game up. And I think that too, the expectation, probably unlike that last season with that starting lineup that we said, I do still think the expectations are still much higher here. Yes, Kevin Durant is out, but like, the expectation is not 8. Like, honestly, the expectation is higher than 500. Like, this is still a well above average basketball team, even without Kevin Durant. Like, the expectation is not Kessler Edwards and Day'Ron Sharpe expectations here. Like there is a totally different animal for where they sit right now. So I think that all of these things happening is important.
Yeah, the really good point that you make there is like, remember, Royce O'Neal, he was playing on a high level Utah team that was in the playoffs year after year. You talk about Nicholas Claxton and emerging. He's at least been around these superstars. Seth Curry has a lot of experience. Even like all the way down, TJ Warren at least has been a high level, he's been a starter in the league. This isn't leaning on rookies.
Yuta's like leading the league in 3-point percentage.
Well, I was even going to throw in Yuta, like for whatever you expected him to be, the percentages have been there first and foremost. And also he played for a Toronto team, a playoff team. He was only averaging 10 or 11 minutes. That's fine. The bottom line is the guys in behind the superstars are more experienced and more talented than who you had last season. And that, I think in a lot of ways, the biggest thing getting over this hump is going to be those veteran experienced players saying, yeah, like this is exactly why we're here, to lift it up when maybe someone needs to go down, when Kevin Durant needs a rest, when Kyrie needs a rest, when Ben Simmons isn't fully the version of himself. That's why you're surrounded by these talented players, and why I think we and the fan base does not look at this stretch as being, oh no, how far are we going to fall? It's no. The expectation is to maintain, be 500, be a little bit better, and then allow Kevin Durant to work back in and not have that pressure of needing to push in the last 20 games of a season to dig out of a hole.
Yeah, for sure. Like the expectation, I think, is like have the 1 seed or the 2 seed still in sight when he comes back.
Yep.
Like I think that is the expectation. Yep. I think it's just like, and I know for sure last year we talked about last year that for sure the expectation was, hey, let's stay out of the play-in.
Hang in, hang on.
And that's just hang in. And by the way, hate narrator, they didn't. they were in the play-in. So okay, we'll get into. The Nets have not made any starting lineup announcements. I don't know if they're going to do that prior to our next episode, but if they do, we'll talk about it. If not, we'll talk about who we think should move into the starting lineup and what we think the minutes breakdown can be exactly there. Yeah. So we'll get into that on next episode as we look into what's going to happen or what could possibly happen in this game against Boston. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Set the 2 things. You subscribe on YouTube to Locked On Nets, and then you also set the alerts so that you know when we're going live or when shows are premiering, because we're premiering the episodes on YouTube different times than the podcast. Podcast goes up once a day, usually like right at the start of the day. YouTube will go up right away. So if you want to get into something a little quicker, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube.
You better believe it, friends. And hey, you part the waters, the same ones that I'm thirsty for. You invite your friends to tea, but when it's me, you lock the door. Why that is, yes, you guessed it, John McCrae, lead singer of Cake.
Oh, we did multiple Cake ones?
Well, credit where credit's due. I get insulted yesterday. I come back strong the following.
Was that yesterday? Man, life comes at you fast. I can't keep anything straight. Okay, yeah, that's yesterday. My God. All right. Well, on that note, we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.